Ghosts, spirits, hauntings, they whisper along the lines between truth and myth, tantalizing us with their possibilities. Some people swear to have encountered the spirits of the dead, while others firmly believe this is impossible. Regardless of what the truth is, the concept of ghosts binds us together, intertwining our past and future together in a fascinating way. The possibility of a spiritual life represents the human desire to touch and to understand the afterlife, such as it may be. A good ghost story can scare, enthrall, and connect us to nameless people who lived 100 years ago. Helps us to understand the life they lived and the hardships they've endured. In this video series, we are exploring some of the strangest and the most enduring ghost stories of our local area. The corner of South St. Andrews Street and Main Street in Dothan, Alabama was and still is a bustling, friendly place. Lush green trees and warm brick buildings with old-fashioned facades look over the busy sidewalks as folks go about their errands or visit the Porter's Hardware Store Museum. If you walk along these streets, you can see hints of the city's unique history, but let's imagine the streets made of dirt, full of wagons and horses, lined with rickety wooden porches and balconies. This is the Dothan of 1885, a lively frontier, newly incorporated and bursting at the seams with colorful characters. If you visit Dothan after dark when the shops have locked their doors, you might even catch a glimpse of a figure who doesn't quite fit in. Taller than average, he is wearing an old-fashioned white jacket and hat. Perhaps he feels more like a forgotten memory than a solid person. You follow him down Main Street, peering through the dim light. The few other people on the street do not seem aware of him at all. If you look away from him, even for a second, you might forget he is there. As you pass the Porter's Museum, you hear a faint echo of something like horse hooves. You can't see any horses anywhere, but when you get to the corner of South St. Andrews Street, both the man and the sound simply disappear. You can look up one street and down the other, but there is no sign of him anywhere, only a few locals heading home for the night. If you stop a local and ask after the ghostly man, they might be confused or they just might give you a knowing look and say, "Oh, that's just Marshal Domingus, on patrol again." The ground where you stand, you see, has been marred with blood in one of the most violent incidents in Dothan's 131-year history. And the controversial man who fought, killed, and nearly died on this spot might just stop by occasionally for a visit from beyond the grave. Dothan, Alabama is a small town with a big story. Long before the Civil War, the Native Americans built a trading post near a spring known as Poplar Head Spring. The soil, which now gives birth to roughly a quarter of the U.S. peanut crop, was originally considered poor. It wasn't until woodsmen decided to clear and sell yellow pine lumber from the area that a few cabins and a stockade were built, forming the unofficial settlement of Poplar Head. By 1860, about 9 families had settled in the area, centered around what is now the junction of Main and Fortner Streets. Even after the Civil War, when the lucrative cotton growing trade exploded in the area, Poplar Head remained a rough and rowdy place. However, the railroad began to connect and civilize the frontier, and in 1885, the rapidly expanding town decided to incorporate. The name Poplar Head was already taken, so a clergyman suggested the name of Dothan, a biblical center of trade, where Joseph was sold into slavery. A piece of paper in a court record office, however, wasn't going to refine a pioneer town overnight. In the first few years of Dothan's existence, several mayors and lawmen resigned, unwilling to deal with the coarse and stubborn population. Would Dothan ever be able to thrive? It is at this part of the story where we finally meet our ghostly man, the specter who is thought to patrol the Dothan Main Street to this day. Back in 1885, John Lewis Tobe Domingus wasn't ghostly at all. He was the Marshal of Dothan and later the Chief of Police, a tall man with a fierce gaze and a very large, well-groomed mustache. People remembered him as a colorful character, courteous but forceful. His obituary describes him as a man without fear, inspiring to all who knew him. It claims that Domingus was the reason Dothan came of age as a city. By 1889, 5 years after Dothan incorporated, Domingus was walking the streets as Marshal, under the governance of Mayor A.C. Crawford. But why do we remember Domingus today? And what was the dramatic event that would tie his soul to the streets of Dothan? In that fateful year of 1889, a chain of events occurred that propelled the town into chaos it had never imagined. The horror of Dothan Riot was largely responsible for bringing peace for years to come, and even today, people believe they can see and hear the echoes of that unforgettable moment at the junction of South St. Andrews and Main. Whether or not actual ghosts walk the streets, it cannot be denied that the ground on this spot is haunted by a very dark past. Let's explore the days leading up to the riot of October 12, 1889. The Farmers Association was an organization of cotton farmers who had a warehouse in the city on South Foster and Crawford Street. They brought bales of cotton to the warehouse on heavy carts called drays, stored them, and then carried them to the new rail depot. In an attempt to organize this industry, Dothan established a dray tax, demanding money from anyone who drove the dray wagons through the city boundaries, which at this time were just 1 square mile. This caused a lot of problems for the Farmers Association operations, and the manager, a man named George M.C. Stringer, refused to pay. Even after he was taken to court and told that the tax was mandatory, Stringer still stood his ground. He said that drays coming to and from his warehouse were exempt from the tax. It was a fateful autumn day on October 12, 1889, when George Stringer drove a dray of untaxed cotton down the street, past Marshal Domingus and his deputy, Parker Powell. Perhaps it was a chilly day with a damp breeze that hinted of winter. Or perhaps the sun burned hot on the yellow-orange leaves of the tree. The people going about their business in the street had likely heard gossip about Stringer and the dray tax. They cast curious or nervous glances at his cart, wondering how Domingus would react. Some likely stopped and stared from a safe distance as Domingus stepped forward, halting the cart and arresting Stringer. Domingus and Powell grimly helped Stringer unload the cotton. When the dray was empty, the tension exploded as Stringer drew a knife, trying to flee arrest. Domingus whipped out his club and the men broke into a fight. The knife sliced across Domingus' cheek, but he did not hesitate and struck Stringer fiercely in the head, knocking the Farmers Association manager out and handcuffing him. Everyone took a deep breath and went back to their business, whispering about the incident. Seeing the political tensions turn to violence was frightening, but relief dominated. The tension had broken and the fight ended quickly, or so they thought. The mayor sided with Domingus, finding Stringer guilty on the tax issue. A frustrated Stringer appealed to the Circuit Court of Henry County and took out a warrant of assault against the marshal and the deputy. Over 300 people gathered to witness the trial. In a way, this issue represented their personal struggle, the struggle of Dothan, and even the struggle of the United States. Freedom and order were not used to coexisting, and the rapidly fading Wild West clashed with the spread of civilization. On October 12th, the day of the trial, a series of coincidences began that would propel Dothan and Marshal Domingus into infamy. A witness for the defense didn't appear, and the trial was postponed until the following day. Crowds milled in the streets looking to pass the time. The tension that had broken a few days ago began to build again. Something was boiling just under the surface. The second coincidence occurred when George Stringer's brother, Green Boasty Stringer Jr., walked down Main Street and saw Domingus and Deputy Powell standing near the brand new Porter's hardware store. He was likely already fuming at the slight to his family. To make matters worse, Domingus happened to be talking through the events of the earlier fight. Green Stringer stopped and angrily informed Domingus that "You mistreated my brother." At this point, some people were starting to pay attention while others hurried away. Domingus, never one to back down from his idea of justice, stood up to Green Stringer and called him a liar. Green immediately returned the insult. In the final and most deadly coincidence, George Stringer himself appeared on the scene just in time to see Domingus club Green Stringer unconscious, just as he had with George. Days, months, and even years of fury exploded as he rushed down toward Domingus, shouting, "That is my brother you are knocking." Domingus defensively stepped back into the wall of shops and drew his pistol, firing into the street. Instead of striking the advancing Stringer, the bullet ironically hit a different Farmers Association man named Jeff Walker, killing him immediately. The sound of his body hitting the street marked the splintering of justice into vengeance and propelled Dothan into a chaos it had never known before. Stringer and Domingus closed on each other, striking out with the butts of their pistols. When they broke apart, both men opened fire. In the next 5 seconds, approximately 20 shots were fired from 4 different guns. Panicking people ran in every direction, trying to escape, leaving Walker's body alone in the empty street. Domingus staggered under a bullet from Stringer, but stayed standing. Stringer, on the other hand, crashed into the ground with a gruesome bullet wound in his forehead. A third Farmers Alliance member, William Newberry, fired off several shots in defense of his boss, striking Domingus with a second bullet and just missing Deputy Powell, who responded with his own gun. The smells of blood, gunpowder, smoke, and fear filled the streets as the shots finally stopped. Along with the 2 dead men, Deputy Parker, the Stringer brothers' father, and a man named Peter too, suffered gunshot wounds. Domingus fought for his life, blood spilling from his abdomen and head, as well as a knife wound on his side. Incredibly, all the wounded men survived and were arrested the next day. The wounded men recovered in a house arrest, while the rest were taken to jail. Emotions ran extremely high in Dothan over the next few days. Fear and anger gave way to shock and even shame. Residents of all kinds agreed that this was not what they wanted for their city. In this way, the riot actually paved the way for a peaceful Dothan, with law-abiding residents that evolved with the changing times. Because of the dramatic nature of the riot, the participants were judged outside of Dothan in Dale County, Alabama. Domingus was sentenced to 10 years in a penitentiary for the murder of George Stringer. For the second time, however, Domingus walked free. He appealed to and convinced the Alabama Supreme Court that the shooting was in self-defense and did not represent a previously formed design to kill Stringer. Regardless of what you think of Domingus's actions, he was clearly motivated by a passion for his town and a desire for what he saw as justice. He went on to serve as the chief of police in Dothan for many years. If you like our videos, click that subscribe button. Also, don't forget to click that notification bell so you never miss a video that we upload. Know someone you think that would like our videos? Share with them.